Man, I really need to stop putting off series because this is the second sequel series I've picked up recently that has just been fantastic. Hello and welcome to my channel. In this video we are going to be talking about The Wounded Land by Stephen R. Donaldson, which is the first book in the Second Chronicles of Thomas Covenant the Unbeliever. And man, this has been on my list to get to for so long. I finally picked this up in the month of September for my September still haven't gotten to that theme of my MBR. And I've been meaning to get to this really since I finished the first trilogy, which I loved at the end of it, and I just haven't gotten to it. And so I finally jumped in, got to it, and I'm really, really happy with the fact that I did. I will note, I triple formatted this, so I did some physical, some ebook, and I did a bit of the audio. The audio is a new narrator to me, Scott Brick, and it sounds like the company is through him as well. One of the cleanest, crispest audiobooks and narration that I've heard. Really, really good. So if you're an audio person, it's there, and it's also included on Audible. I don't know if the first series is, but this one was, at least this book. So hey, that works there. I was surprised too, because this is the kind of book that I do typically prefer to read physically, whether it's physical or ebook with it. And so the audio was actually really, really good. And then since I just did all three formats to try and get through a little bit quicker, and I got through this really, really quick, actually quicker than I thought I would, because it's not a crazy long book. But Donaldson, his prose is not the fastest reading, and so I really flew through and had a good time. So let's talk about it. I did do a series spotlight on the first Thomas Covenant Chronicles, the Unbeliever, which is the Lord Fal's Bane, the Ill-Earth War, and the Power That Preserves. And it is a phenomenal but controversial series. I do get why some people nope out of the first book. I absolutely get why a lot of people hate Thomas Covenant. But the series, the trilogy in its entirety, is masterful, and there's so many great things with it, and it can be hard to pick back up after that. And so The Wounded Land, I thought, did a really fantastic job. Now, the blur of this one is quite a lot of time has passed. It's been 10 years in the quote-unquote real world for Thomas Covenant. It's been considerably longer than that, and so the land is entirely different than what we last saw. And also, the big thing that's different here is we have another character that's there with him, Lyndon Avery, who also comes from his world, who is a doctor, and kind of, without realizing it, gets drug along here. So already there's some things that are different. And with such a big time up, because we're literally talking about thousands of years, which in the blurb it mentions as well, I was kind of afraid of how that would impact the first trilogy, because is that going to make things seem less important because of what happened there, that sort of thing. But instead, it really gives you, you're exploring the world in a really different way. And there's still some equally heartbreaking things as well. The big thing I want to note here is if you still enjoyed the first trilogy but did struggle with the main character, Thomas Covenant, I will say he is a little bit less unlikable in the sequel series. He's still, himself, but 10 years have passed. Some other things have changed. Some things I don't want to mention happened really early on in this one that are pretty different in the setup, and he has another person there with him. And so the dynamic is different, and his character is pretty different. And it's a different Thomas Covenant. He's very much still the same person. It's not like these are changes that don't make sense. But I feel like realistically, what happens at the end of The Power That Preserves, there's no way that doesn't change a person. And B, 10 years is a fair amount of time for things to have happened. And so it's just he still is him, but different in what I think is a good way. Obviously he's not a likable character in the first trilogy, but I still really, really loved it and think it was a really interesting, different take on that sort of fantasy. But here it's almost more compelling character-wise because of the fact that he's not so irredeemable. But the other thing is the land is entirely different because some things have happened, basically. So Lord Fal has definitely been busy. The land is very different, and instead of being this place that's completely full of life and lushness and beauty, it is desiccated and barren and just kind of horrible in so many ways. And so you have the reader, along with Thomas Covenant, kind of dealing with seeing all of this beauty from the original trilogy, which is a big reason a lot of people fell in love with it, is all of the beauty of the land, and it's gone. And it's just, it gives you a different feeling. It allows Donaldson to set up some very different things, but it also is just, it's kind of like, wow, all of these different things. So we get some times where we revisit some things, some of them in surprising and heartbreaking ways, but also the impetus for what's being set up here also still very much does harken back to the original trilogy. So if you're like me and you think like, oh, when that far in the future, it's not going to matter. It still does. Like, the things that happen in the first trilogy still matter, still are very relevant, and it's been thousands of years in the land, but it's 10 years for Covenant, which, like I said, is a long time. But the things also that happen in the original trilogy are things that a person's certainly not going to forget. So that's that. I am going to talk a little bit spoilers at this point, so I'll put timestamps if you want to skip past, if you have not read this. But I want to talk a little bit just because there are definitely things that I want to mention. So I'll start with, I alluded to the things still being important, and the big thing that I think was such an interesting way to do it is with, it's called the Wounded Land, and so Covenant, being that staunch unbeliever, which he's a little bit less here, that's part of the different dynamic. But it's like, how can he help it? Because even though he didn't ever want to believe, and he was very, very adamant that he didn't believe, and it's some sort of dream or that kind of thing, but he couldn't help but be impacted by the beauty, especially everything, and it was so poignant with him and his disease. And so having him come back and see this just ravaged land and see him just heartbroken, it does humanize him a little bit more, and I think made a difference. But then with the big thing that caused it all is the destruction of the Staff of Law, which he blames himself for, and which involved Elena, which harkens back to Lena in the first book. It's just still the long-running consequences of his actions there. And that was one of the things that made The Power That Preserves such just a sad but deep and fantastic book, is him having to face Lena again, and still all of those things. And it comes up, he tells Lyndon about it too, because he wants her to know who he really is. And so it's just like, he has definitely not let it go, and he's not forgiven himself, and it's still the long branching things. The surprising thing, though, that I really was not expecting is the revisiting of the giants, where he meets these giants, and we kind of see the remains of what happened. Because the giants, especially, Saltheart Foamfaller, was the heart and soul of every scene he was in. And so the way that was revisited was just fantastic, and ends it on a really sad note, but then also setting up what I'm really curious on, the fact that they are actually leaving the land. That the whole Sunbane thing is kind of a localized thing in the land. They're leaving the land to go search for the one tree. And so it's again, we're still in the land. This is a follow-up series, but Donaldson, I feel like, has gotten really creative here with making this feel distinct while still harkening back to all of the pieces of the land. And so really, really fantastic. And just the way that everything is just twisted. It's very much the Lord Fowl thing, where he's really twisted everything, and the Na Moram, named after the High Lord Moram, and it's this evil group, and they're all convinced they're doing the right thing, but they're led by a raver, and it's just all of these things. Everything's been twisted, corrupted over thousands of years, and I feel like that's not normally something you get to see in a fantasy book. You don't get to see the big changes like that, so it's really fascinating to see as well. And I do think this maintains the tone well. So those are just some things I wanted to talk about spoiler wise, because I think it worked really well. I guess when he was in the forest as well, the Andalane, and saw the visions of the dead, also a great way to have those little cameos without rehashing anything. So really impressed with those things. Circling back to kind of sum up things, I think this does a really fantastic job with balancing, again, and I said similar things when I was talking with the Witchwood Crown, balancing this being a new series, new stuff, not just rehashing what happened in the first trilogy, while also still really maintaining a lot of the feel, and also having things that have matured, things that have changed a little bit in the characters as we go along. So I think that's important. You don't want somebody to be completely static. And even Thomas Covenant, the person that's just trying so hard to be unchanged and unfazed by everything, even he's changed. a bit with the things happening. I also think the addition of another character, as well as the change in the land and the different side of what we're seeing there, I think worked really well. The only thing I guess I could call a complaint here, which is probably just me being way too hard on this because of the way I felt about the first trilogy, but it does feel, at least in this first book, it doesn't quite hit the heights of what the last series did. Now, I say that knowing that that was really a book 2 and a book 3 thing where it really brought it up. And I feel like when I finished the trilogy, it did up all of the books, the last book. So I'm hoping that this will be the case here. I'm looking for a little bit more with kind of just the philosophical battle and look, because all of that in the first trilogy was just so fantastic with the parallels between Covenant and the Land and Lord Val and his leprosy and all of that kind of thing. And here we're doing things a little bit more straightforward, but you still have some of those pieces with the way that things have been corrupted. So I'm really, really fascinated to see where this goes. And I actually wasn't planning to, but I've already started the second book, despite the fact that I have way too many other things to read, because I'm really excited to continue with this. So yeah, if you if you've not started this one, I definitely recommend it. The only other thing too is like the library letter said, Donaldson does like to use some weird vocab words, and there are a couple that he liked to use a lot, which benison and anodyne are words that he used quite a few times for words that are not super common, which. And like, I mean, sometimes that annoys me, sometimes it doesn't. It didn't bother me enough here. So I still think, like I said, really, really happily surprised with this one, and excited to continue. I'll definitely talk about once I finish the second trilogy, where it all stacks up for me. But yeah, if you're like me and haven't gotten to it yet, after enjoying the first trilogy, definitely check it out. And even if you're somebody who didn't really like Covenant but liked the books, you might like this more, because Covenant is less annoying in this one, I think, for sure. But that's really it for this one, though. So let me know your thoughts in the comments if you've read this, or if you're looking forward to it, or just your thoughts on Covenant in general. I know this series is one that people have a lot of opinions on, so I'd love to hear from you. Make sure to give the video a like if you enjoyed it. Check the links in the description, as always, for the Patreon if you want to support what I do, as well as the Wizardly Enclave Discord if you want to chat books, whether this book, other books, really anything at all. It's a lot of fun, and we'd love to have you.